This is Lambda Bible Studies. Today's topic is Christian views on universalism, or is Christianity a universalist religion? Or if it is, what does that mean? Joining me today is Ferro. How are you doing, Ferro?
I'm very well. Thank you very much, Luke. I've got a great story to kick us off, if that's okay.
Please.
My daughter's been going to Sunday school, and we're out for a walk around a forest, and all of a sudden she said, "I'm Jesus, and you're Peter, and we're walking on water right now."
Wow!
And then she said, "But Peter, you're sinking. Hold my hand."
Oh, that's so sweet.
It was the most adorable heresy of all time.
Yeah. If you compare your heresy, if you can add cuteness, you will get away with a few extra years before being burnt at the stake, generally.
Exactly. If only Arian knew, he should have just framed the whole thing in a cute manner, and then maybe he would have made it.
Do you want to start by giving a bit of context here? What brings us to this topic?
Yeah, good point. I guess I wanted to have this kind of stream as a bit of a discussion point. I want to see some good questions and comments in the chat, and also the comment. If you're listening after the live show, I want to hear your thoughts as well. But from my perspective, I think there's been a lot of discussion in various distant right streams, emphasizing the universalist nature of Christianity. And in my mind, it sort of falls into a couple of different forms. I think you've got the kind of Curtis Yarvin, Gottfried-esque. The reason why we're in the situation we're in right now is it's because we're in this kind of post-Christian universalism, basically. So it's basically laying the blame of modern society effectively at the feet of Christians. Saying I think Gottfried describes his therapeutic state as a heretical form of Christianity, quite explicitly, which I think is really interesting, but also kind of dangerous. And obviously, as a defender of the faith, I want to try and challenge some of those assumptions. I think the other end, so you've got this kind of post-Christian view, and emphasizing that kind of Christian universalism minus the spirituality equals the situation we're in right now. That's the first vein. I think the second vein is Christianity is universal, paganism is perennial and based, and that's the kind of BAP/AA takes on the situation as well. And again, I think there's lots of interesting discussion here, and I think the approach of both of those camps is basically just to slap this label on a very complicated manner, and not really had any discussion about it, and not really had any kind of fire back from the Christian side on this matter. And I wanted, I'll say now, I'm not a theologian, but a mere observer of things. And there's a few things that I've noticed, both practically and kind of in real life and theologically, that I thought I would share as a discussion point to start to say, is it true that Christianity is the world's most universalist religion, and at the same time, are we ultimately responsible for the total destruction of civilization itself?
There's certainly a lot for us to get our teeth into. Now, I don't want to put pressure on you, but did you prepare any slides? Because I know you're known for your, if nothing else, your beautiful and memorable slideshows. So,
well, I'm glad you asked that, Luke, because of course, the meme is real.
Is this a moment to share them?
This is it. They're coming up right now.
Here we go. Shall I click add to stream? Here they go. You're up.
Okay, cool. So I've got the chat on as well, so I'd be interested to hear kind of people's thoughts as we kind of go through. And also, Luke, just please stop me as we're chatting through all of this. The first thing, I guess, when talking about this whole topic is around like definitions, and I think
What is that beautiful font, by the way?
I don't know. I spent ages searching for it, but that's like the Ferro font. I went like I use it on all of the various slide decks that I produce. But it has to be a serif. Now, I think one of the confusions around universalism is that when I've encountered it in the past, it's referred to something different to how both of those camps that I talked about at the start refer to it. And from reading around, there's also, I would say, two other layers to that. So I've kind of tried to identify what universalism is by having these kind of three pots. A form of moral universalism, a salvational universalism, and incidentally, that's the one that I'd heard of. If you go to theological college, my cousin went. There's deep, in-depth discussions about salvational universalism, and but if I'd never encountered some of the critiques around this. I guess kind of like what I'm going to call nationalistic universalism. Yeah,
because one of the things that I think has been going on in this discourse is a certain amount of equivocation, where the word universalist is first meaning one thing, and then later in the conversation is sneakily swapped out to mean something else.
Exactly.
So you get somebody to agree that they are universalist according to one of these definitions, and then you attack them for having agreed to the other definition. I suppose in the national sense, it's connected to the idea of globalism as well, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And I've tried to define this kind of national universalism in a second, but I want to talk through these first two points first, which people may be more familiar with. And again, this is where I feel like this is where the hoodwink from those two camps has started, because thinking about moral universalism, you got to think about Aquinas. You got to think about C.S. Lewis's discords on what he calls the Tao or the Tao in Abolition of Man, where he tries to assert that outside of religion itself, there is ideas of a universal morality. For example, I think the examples that he kind of brings up include things like it's universally good to respect your parents, for example, or it's universally good not to kill children or something like
that. The negatives are easier to come up with, I guess. Not to kill, not to steal, not to commit adultery or whatever.
Yeah, interestingly, he's quite specific about it. Like again, okay. I think even the killing, I think Lewis would be quite pragmatic about that and to say, look, there is a time to kill.
So would the opposite of this type of universalism be relativism? The idea either universal morals exist or they don't, and if they don't, then you are a relativist.
I think it's more complicated because I see these. Okay, Lewis doesn't necessarily break this out, but you could basically say, are you a subjectivist or a
sure
objectivist in terms of morality? Are there these kind of fixed morals? And you can say if you're an objectivist, these universal morals sit across everyone. I think Lewis would then say, look, Christianity has its own unique subset of morals which sit on top of that. But personally, I think that Christianity is both subjective and objective in terms of morality, specifically around the Bible passages around the spirit of the law. if you remember that, and also Jesus's general questioning of a legalistic approach to morality. So, for example, the Pharisees had these list of laws that they were carrying out, and they were doing it in such obtuse and annoying ways as to like tick the box, but not to live the life. So again, it's kind of like, but again, to be fair to them, they tick the box. So what's your problem, Jesus? Do you know what I'm saying? So I think I think Christianity is a little bit of a weird religion in the fact that it does have this combination of both objective moral truths, but there is a bit of subjectivity. There's a bit of flex in there at the same time. When your donkey's in the ditch, if that makes sense. There or there's other verses like there's a time there's a time for X.
Yeah, Ecclesiastes, the old time for your morning and a time for dancing, time for etc.
Yeah,
I think I've found the Spirit in the Law passage, but it'll give me a second and I can bring it up and hopefully not boot you out from presenting your slides as well.
No, it's fine.
It also reminds me of that very pragmatic bit of advice about one considers all days to be equal, and one considers some days to be special. And if one celebrates them, if one considers them holy, they should observe them, and then they observe them to the Lord. And if they don't consider them, they don't observe them to the Lord, and not to cause trouble for one another.
Yeah, I've got another one. Let's read this one. I've got another example on top of that as well, actually.
Right. So let me see. It was earlier than this. Not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Is that the passage you were thinking of?
Yeah, and I think there's a few other similar passages. So again, I think there's this kind of contextual element to it as well, which again you could consider to be moral relativism. Basically, I'll give you one other example, and that's around women dressing modestly. What does modesty mean? Surely it is contextual to the time and to the country you're in. For example, a woman in shorts and a t-shirt, it's normal in the UK, for example, and you wouldn't necessarily be immoral there.
Scandalized, yeah.
Yeah, but if you went to a different country which had stricter ideas of do you see what I'm saying? Like,
yes,
there isn't a specific outfit that we have to wear. It's being understanding the situation you're in, and I think that's, again, this is where we're quite different to some other religions as well, where they're very prescriptive about this is how you should dress, or this is what you should do.
Yes, so it's establishing that there are both universal and relative components to Christian morality. Is that a good summary?
Yes, exactly.
The general principle is to do with relationships, right? You're considering in the case of dressing modestly, you think about the people who are going to see you and what they're going to be made to react to, and how they're likely to consider what you're doing, and therefore you take into account the social norms, etc., because the prescription is not down to, it's not in the realm of wear this but don't wear that.
Exactly, yeah, as a specific outfit. And again, like I think it's really worth seeing how modern Judaism, for example, has sort of ended up where again it's this again the Orthodox Jews that they all have to wear the same outfit, and all the women have to have I think they all have wigs. Is that right? They have the same haircut, and they all look identical. Basically, it's part of that Talmudic legalistic prescriptiveness. But all of this stuff that we've talked about is actually a bit of a sidetrack, because this isn't what those two camps are talking about. This but it is another really interesting topic we've dived into.
It's useful to have had to keep that in our minds so we don't confuse it with that we've just talked about. What are these guys talking about?
Well, yeah, just one other kind of red herring, and that's the salvational one, which is I'll cover just really quickly. And again,
Sure.
that's the fundamental idea of Christian universalism is universal reconciliation, that all humans will eventually receive salvation. And again, interestingly, this isn't necessarily a modern idea. For example, Oregon, who's a famous, I can't say it. If I say early church father, the Catholics will get mad at me because he's not a saint, but he is. He's like an influential early church figure, for example.
He's early. He's connected to the church, and he's he was a father, but he wasn't an early church father.
He's a patriarchal figure.
Yeah. Okay, so universalism is a term used in theologically to mean everybody ends up getting saved, and all the bits about judgment you have to reinterpret to mean like, oh, you have suffering during your life and it was all metaphorical, that type of view.
Yeah, like for example, Oregon thought that hell was like a temporary period or something like that, that's almost like a purgatory of sorts. If we scroll down, here is his sorry, I'm in control. I'm in control.
Yeah,
there we go. I was sharing. I just forgot to scroll. I was just being really lazy.
You were giving me instructions as if as if I was AA running your slides for you. But...
exactly. That's what I'm used to. I'm sorry, Luke. Apologies. Look, I've even here's some Christian salvational universalist verses for you. I mean, I was pretty whelmed by it, but anyway. Sorry, all Christian universalists out there. Apologies, but anyway, but interestingly, this is the context I've heard about universalism. Basically, is all in this idea
it's a very seductive view because people, I think
they want to be
dislike
nice,
the idea of
of
their non-believing family members being judged, for example. So you can see the appeal. It's just unfortunately doesn't seem to match with what the Bible actually describes.
Exactly. But again, this is another red herring. So what is the true Christian universalism as defined by these chaps? I've tried. I mean, I've got this awful name: National Religious Universalism. I think what I think it applies to is, as they see it, is that Christianity has some kind of inbuilt national subversive nature that will undermine different peoples. And I've tried to divide this both practically and from a metaphysical perspective as well.
Okay.
From a metaphysical, you've got the classic Nietzschean glorifying weakness example, the slave religion. You've got emphasis on equality. So again, we're like certain Bible passages that we'll touch in a second, highlighting kind of shared identities. So equality both at a national and an international level as well. And again, these idea of human rights. Now, what does this practically mean? Well, it means, for example, from an immigration perspective, you've got someone like Justin Welby massively advocating for like increasing like asylum claims, for example. So I think we need a name for. I'm going to call them the belligerents. The belligerents see Welby pushing for asylum, and it kind of adds fuel to the fire for this form of like Christianity as this national universalism. And I think what they're saying is basically, you know, a lot of these asylum claims, well, like if you kind of see what Welby's reasons are for, you know, we should be accepting more asylum seekers, for example, that he's relying on Christian virtues to encourage that. For example, ideas about charity, about humanity, you know, this human rights, etc. And again, the idea of you know, these are people fundamentally in need. You could say from a foreign policy, it affects people as well. Like, how do we interact with the world? You know, if you think that all you know, all humans are kind of equal, and there shouldn't be any borders, kind of thing, you're going to kind of implement that on a kind of a national aggressive level as well. So there's these kind of foreign policy implications. You've got the classic slavery example. You know, obviously Christianity had an important part in removing slavery, and you know, it was lines like, you know, are you not a brother and a friend? You know, that was the kind of the tagline that was used as part of that. So, you know, Christian morality being used to free slaves. Not that I'm saying these people are pro slavery, but the underlying assumption of the argument is the equality between, you know, like we're basically identical. You know, the African slave and the Englishman, for example.
Yeah, and often it's said that if you're engaging well on a debate, you should be able to put up a description of your interlocutor's perspective that they would agree with, and I think they would be quite happy with this summary, because they could say these are positions that a lot of churches would be promoting from the pulpit across Western countries at the moment. Is that fair to say? Like, I think they would want to say that Christianity is responsible for the pro-immigration, multiculturalism, human rights, equality, anti-slavery stances, and that people who delight in strength, like Putin, are opposed to a Christian ethic and gospel. So I think you've kind of captured something here, which is, I think you've put a fair description. You're not creating a straw man, is I guess what I'm saying.
Good. Thank you. Now, and again, part of my problem with this whole debate is that they don't really define this. So hopefully this kind of is a good initial framework. Now, the classic, I call this the old Galatians chestnut here around this topic, constantly rolled out here. Okay, with no nuance. I scream when AA mentions this. I don't know if you want to do your Luke voice while reading out this.
You want me to read this? Yeah. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free. There is, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise.
So again, you can see across there already this from face value, I'd say you've got ideas of total equality of the sexes, the idea of this kind of the slavery point, and also the almost kind of religious, Jew or Gentile, previous religious markers have been kind of melted down. Now, I mean, I'm not gonna go too much into detail with this specific verse, but it's obvious that if you look at the context of it, it's talking about the connections that all Christians have at a spiritual level, not necessarily a physical level, and that nuance is often lost on those reading it. But let's just hold on to kind of counter arguments for now. I've kind of finished off this kind of understanding the kind of situation a little bit by trying to plot out again their kind of big concern, right? And effectively, there are 4 blocks of people. You've got the Christian national, so it's people who share the same, I guess, kind of nationhood as you. Like you're both Englishmen, Luke, for example.
Yes, we are.
Both Christian English. You said that in a quite suspicious way there.
I'm
Yes.
glad to be an Englishman. You think I'm not convincing people that I am? I've got, they define the yard by a particular object, and other people bring their yards to that, like master yard. I consider my English accent and my Englishness to be the yardstick of Englishness. So yeah, I hopefully that's reinforced my Englishness and claims to it.
We'll quote you on that.
Yeah.
The other kind of blocks are your non-Christian national. So what about the fedora wearers, or all those Druidic pagans who are also English? And then you've got the Christian foreigners, and then the non-Christian foreigners. And I think essentially the underlying fear is, if you were to place, if a Christian were to place where his priorities are in terms of resource allocation, time, and love, it would always look like this: Christian national, Christian foreign, non-Christian national, and non-Christian foreign.
And the dispute is probably the 2 in the middle and the ordering of those, right?
Exactly.
People dislike that sequence.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting question as a whole, and I don't think I necessarily have the complete answer or the complete picture, and I wouldn't say that I do. But what I've tried to do following this is to look at a combination of what I call reality and theological arguments. Now, I guess the reason for observed reality is AA did this big Christian nationalism article in some kind of journal or whatever, where he was fighting against it. And one of his points was, I don't want to hear any rebuttals that use Bible verses, which I think is obviously ridiculous. However, to placate the wily Persian, I've tried to include three arguments from observed reality showing that Christianity, I don't believe, is a universalist religion, a national universalist religion. Now, to start off, I thought we would take a look at what does English Buddhism look like.
Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, I don't know if you ever wondered. If you spend some time, but this is the face. This is the face of English Buddhism right now.
It's like seeing a new color. This is something I've never observed. I see a cup of tea, and then I see lots of stuff out of the Far East. Is that in close proximity, but somehow still not meshing? I think they should have made the Buddha like holding a cup of tea.
Well, again, I think that's a really interesting point. But I guess what I wanted to kind of emphasize here is that I don't know if you ever looked at religions in other religions which have localized, they always manage to retain a foreign sense to them. So, for example, the outfit that he's wearing is the identical outfit of a Buddhist monk He could be in Tibet, for example, or the Buddha on the right hand side. I don't know if you can zoom in.
I mean, you can. I don't know if I have the capacity for my.
No. I know. Okay, I'll try and.
Oh, viewers, put your eye really close to your phone screen.
There we go. I've slightly increased it. I can tell you now, this whole thing is identical to a Buddha that you could buy in the East.
A bit like how when the Jedi religion spread from Tatooine to Coruscant, they continued wearing their sandy robes.
I will not. I can't believe you genuinely used a Star Wars analogy in this deep theological discussion. Yes, it's exactly. I literally have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm going to say yes. It's exactly like
don't
the
worry,
Jedi.
Don't worry about it.
Right. What I think is interesting about Christianity is that it often ends up having flavors of the local country, and I've got a couple of examples here. I don't know if you've seen these before. We all know that, like, from a strictly technical perspective, that Jesus was a Semite. He would have looked like a dusky white male, basically, is from my understandings of genetics and the peoples of the time. However, Jesus, if you go from place to place to place, is often reinterpreted by individual groups of people. So on the top left-hand side, this is a depiction from the Eastern Ethiopian Orthodox Church, where we've got Black Jesus with a pretty sweet afro as well.
Yeah, it's true.
On the right-hand side, this is obviously a meme picture, but I just absolutely love it. Before this is Korean swole Jesus.
Roided up, presumably in some sort of gym.
Exactly, yeah. But if you see his face, I'm not engaging the manual zoom again. It was absolutely manual zoom was not strong enough to show. You have to just Google mega Korean Jesus. But if you see his face, they basically have the facial
Korean
of a Korean man.
Okay, yeah.
And then on the bottom left hand, I don't know if you've ever seen blonde Jesus before.
Wow.
This is quite rare. This is quite a rare Jesus that I've managed to find.
This is like if you're doing collectible cards, this one would be worth a fortune.
Yeah.
Where is this from?
This is from Germany. But I guess going back to my point, think about some of these other major religions. When have you ever seen a black version of Buddha? When have you ever seen a black version of Muhammad? Well, there's other reasons for that as well, but
so you're saying this is kind of point in favor of the universalist nature of Christianity, because in practice Christianity adapts to different cultures.
I'm actually saying the opposite, Luke.
Okay.
Because if we go back to those different points again, maybe we should have had like globalism as one across there. I think fundamentally what they're trying to accuse us of is saying that everyone internationally is the same, and there are no national boundaries.
Right. Compare the iconography of Christianity around the world to the iconography of McDonald's, and it's clear that McDonald's retains identical logo. It's the same clown wherever you go, whereas Christianity is morphing.
Exactly. So it always retains a national character at the same time. So it has this anti-universalism built in to it at the same time. Is what I'm initially arguing. Okay.
Got it.
No more. Like, it's even more so when we look at the denominations, right? Here's a question for you. When was the last time you ever saw a Hindu nationalistic denomination, right? For example, have you ever seen like Mexican Hinduism?
No, not that I'm aware of.
No, but look at all of these different denominations. Now, obviously, some of these sit within a Okay, I mean, denominations, they're a hot mess, basically. But even if you look at some of the bigger groups, you've got, for example, the Copts, who represent the Egyptians. You've got the Maronites, who represent the Syrians. You've got the Greek Byzantines, but you've also got the Greek Catholics at the same time. So my second argument is there is no other religion that has so many national denominations as Christianity, showing that whether it's through time alone that these national characteristics get pulled out and cause rifts, basically. I think there's even an argument to say that the whole Reformation is caused by like Germanic autism, basically, or something like that. If you see all of the countries which become Protestant in the Reformation, it's basically North Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, the north part of France, England. It's all of these Germanic countries. There's an interesting national element to the Reformation as well. Why isn't it like more spread evenly? Why isn't it like 50-50 on every single country? Actually, it sits through national boundaries in a very similar way. And I do wonder whether it's Germanic ideas of individualism appeal more to Protestant interpretations of Christianity, fundamentally, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
So are you saying that Roman Catholicism is a sort of Mediterranean or a Latin expression of Christianity?
Yeah. I think
versus say Orthodox Russian Orthodox Christianity is clearly different from either of those two that you've just described. People would recognize even an alien visiting the different churches would pick up this kind of different set of tastes, different set of preferences and approaches.
Yeah, like I think it is more complicated than that, because I think there is kind of like geopolitical elements to it as well. But I think it's undeniable when you go down to the like sub-denomination level. Again, maybe not Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant. Beyond that, there are literally hundreds of individual nations or groups of people represented by individual denominations. So that's my second argument is
great.
Yeah. Okay. You know who are the true multiculturalists? Of course, pagans.
Firing back on all cylinders. I need one of those sound effects, like an explosion, or an air horn for these bombs that you're dropping.
Exactly. Do you want to have a guess who this statue is of?
So it's a pagan figure, is it?
Yeah.
It looks like is that a Greek or a Roman carving?
It's a Roman carving.
Roman. Helen of Troy. No.
That was a terrible. That was an awful answer, Luke. That's right. I'm sending you to classics class after this school.
I know nothing about classics. You've really thrown me for a loop here.
Oh, sorry, Luke. It's actually Isis. So I don't. I don't know if you're familiar with basically pagan thoughts on other gods, and obviously this again, we're gonna have some pagans reading in chat or in the comments after this, but in general, it's my understanding that pagans, and certainly polytheistic pagans, consider themselves to be like their gods to be part of a larger kind of like universal group of gods. And when they encountered for example another nation with their own gods, they either mapped their gods onto the existing gods they had, or they brought them in as a new god. I'll just give you two examples of that. Have you ever noticed, like, why does Romans have different god names to the Greeks if it's the same religion? The truth is that effectively that the Romans were sort of like God colonized by Greek religion, and their gods had their kind of names like mapped onto the those new names. If you also look, sorry, that you go.
I was going to say I've heard of this kind of idea that even if you were, so say there was some business dealings going on between the Egyptians and the Romans, that the Egyptians had Ra and the Romans had whoever their chief god was, and they just sort of
Jupiter,
a Jupiter, right? And they'd just agree with each other, like, yeah, well, when we say Ra, you mean Jupiter, and
exactly.
So we're sort of talking about the same, and therefore, if you swear to Jupiter and we swear to Ra, we'll both trust each other.
Exactly. So already you've got this. This sounds like actually this is a universalist religion that so basically any pagan is universalist with any other like pagan group or even non-pagan group internationally. Secondly, they also incorporate foreign gods into their pantheon. We do not, when we encounter other religions, we do not include them in our worship. But and this became a serious problem actually because, for example, ISIS and a number of Eastern mystery cults. Are you familiar with Mithras?
I've heard of Mithras.
You'll have heard of him in the context of cringe atheist examples of like, oh, Mithras was actually
the
Jesus
same. Yes, yeah.
But I don't know if you know, but he's actually like a god from Asia Minor. ISIS is from Egypt, but these but actually loads of the pantheon of foreign gods. For example, Dionysus is from Thebes, but he's considered to be like a new god. So again, like it's there's this international incorporation of gods to create understanding, and actually, it's like, oh, we're all just the same, aren't we? Really, we all have the same gods. I call them. You may call your god Ra, yeah. You may call your god Ra, but I call mine Jupiter. But aren't we the same? So it's very unlike Christianity, which has its definite like demarcated. Well, God is God, and your God is not our God, and we don't accept any other interpretation of that in the same kind of way. We don't accept any kind of incorporation as well.
Yeah, I also wonder, the story of Jonah where he tries to run away from God. I feel like that's a real story that is showing a different perspective of God, in that the other people on the ship had their own superstitions and so on. And they were trying to appease their gods. But the way the story is told is like, well, that's stupid because God is different from that. He's got no interest in their idolatrous sacrifices, which is the opposite of what you're saying here, is that and you see this in the modern day if you talk to people who come from bits of Asia which have similar types of religion, which is that Hinduism is quite like ancient paganism, right? Where we go down and offer some we offer some sacrifices at the temple if we want to do well in an exam. We kind of just assume that everyone around the world does the same thing with their local gods.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a weird form of universal acceptance religiously, which you just don't get with Christianity unless they're Christians themselves. And even then, you end up with, like I said, the denominational problem, which I mentioned above. So just a little counter back. Okay. The next thing that's interesting is Christianity has a way of incorporating, like just kind of re-emphasizing this idea of Christianity sort of absorbs elements of the nation and the people that it's in and reflects it in those people and their worship. And there's this often quoted, I don't know if you know about this moment. Are you familiar with Augustine? No, not that Augustine, the other Augustine, um,
That's confusing.
who came to England. Now,
Oh,
this is actually
and did those feet in ancient times.
that's literally who it refers to. I'm pretty sure
It was Augustine. Ah,
oh, wait, no, maybe not. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember if Blake, because Blake was pretty insane actually. So I think he may have actually thought that Jesus.
may have actually thought Jesus.
But Augustine's like one of like the first major saints that come to England and is credited with bringing Christianity to the Celts specifically. And Bede, a famous Anglo-Saxon monk and historiographer, records a discussion between Gregory, the Pope at the time, and Augustine via this other guy, Meletius, who he's sending to Augustine. Here we go. Gregory asked Meletius to tell Augustine what I have upon mature deliberation of the affairs of the English, determined upon that the temple of the idols in those nations ought not to be destroyed, but let the idols that are in them be destroyed. Let holy water be made and sprinkled in said temples. Let altars be erected and relics placed. For if those temples are well built, it is requisite they are to be converted from the worship of devils to the service of the true God, that the nation, seeing that their temples are not destroyed, may the more familiarly resort to the places to which they are accustomed. And I think this is really interesting. Let's compare this with early Islam, for example. Did Islam attempt to adapt and to use the places of worship of existing churches? At the start, no. They basically flattened everything and then rebuilt new stuff. I would say later like the Turks did, but
Okay.
I'm going to demarcate early Islam as like actual true Islam, and this is going to be controversial anyway. But it's a big, yeah. That's the kind of purest form of Islam. I'm gonna say.
Does this idea that Islam morphed when it reached Turkey go against your previous idea that kind of this morphing is a uniquely Christian phenomenon?
I think it's complicated because I think there are some exceptions in Islam, specifically Sharia Iran.
Okay.
And maybe some elements of the Turks, but it's only in response to their interactions with Christianity, is what I would say. And again, this is super unpopular thing to say with the Iranians. If you look,
I'm not surprised.
if you look at their holy sites, it's all saint based. It's saint worship based, which who could have come up with that idea from? I don't know.
Of course, Islam. Islam does have its roots in Christianity, like explicitly in the Quran. Yeah. It talks often about the people of the book and Jesus and so on, and it's sort of meant to be a corrective or a modification of Christianity. So
yeah. I mean, sort of is what I'd say to that. It's I think in practice there was no attempt to retain traditions and culture that had previously existed. Islam acted as almost like a global reset on national cultures. And I just want to give you two kind of contrasting examples between the Christian version and like what happened in Islamic countries. Now, let's
now. But before you go on, I've got a super chat, and somebody complained at me the other day for not reading out their super chat. So before I forget, out of Birmingham Stan, Ferro and Lambda, Universalism, Universalames. I think that's a typo. is a vital idea that must be debated, questioned, and laid out in order for the survival of whites and Christ too. So out of Birmingham Stan, sitting on the edge of his seat, listening to us. It's vital what we're doing here, Ferro.
Well, thank you very much for your super chat. Much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give you two examples, and the first is this is the book of Durrow. So this is one of the first forms of manuscript written by I think it's the Ionian monks. So these are Celtic wow. Christians. Are you familiar with Celtic Christianity, Luke? This is like hipster Christianity.
This is the melding of pagan and Christian cultures that the internet's crying out for. Those look like Aurora. What's it called? The snake eating its tail.
Well, exactly, but it's derived from Germanic and Celtic iconography on that, which has been Christianized. It's this idea of we've taken over the temple,
Ah, I see.
And you see this all over the place. You see it, I guess, even in like modern Mexico or whatever. If you go to the Amazon, etc., there's always this contextualizing to, okay, this is how you've understood your gods. Well, look, we've got this guy across here who came back from the dead, performed miracles, was prophesied about beforehand. He is the real deal. But he's a bit like your guy, so you know what I'm saying. So you should inherit your some traditions from.
Yeah, I mean it's like that Mars Hill sermon that says, I've wandered around your city and I've seen your places of worship, and you're very religious people. In fact, you even have a plinth to the unknown God. But what you worship as unknown, I now proclaim to you, right?
Exactly. So and again, you see this time and time again where Christianity is sort of like melding with the existing national culture, basically.
What's the Christian element in these pictures?
This is a book of Gospels, and on the right hand side, this is a representation of one of the four beasts in Revelation, which is awesome. Luke's eagle.
Huh. It reminds me of an illustration in a copy of The Last Battle I once had.
This is quite a famous manuscript, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was. But again, if you see the kind of iconography for this is like Celtic knots tied to almost if you've seen like Gothic eagles, they're like obsessed with eagles. If you may have seen some of their brooches, etc. From a purely design perspective, it's very similar to their designs, for example. So I think it's fair to say they had contact with.
There's something kind of imperial about that eagle, in a weird way. It's like a prefigurement to, I guess, what would become European culture hundreds of years later. Is that?
Well, I think these guys are coming in at like 550 AD. So this is like this is a post-Roman world. So, you're right. So the kind of eagle has a certain kind of iconographic power to it. Yeah. But here's the question: why don't we see a like literally like a Roman eagle here? Why are we seeing it through the lens of a Celt?
Yes,
because Christianity isn't a Roman religion, and it's not a religion from the Levant. It's it came from Levant or came via those places, but it ultimately comes from God. It comes from there is no specific place for it.
So to kind of put explicitly, I think what you're correct me if this is not what you're aiming towards, but people are worried about Christianity as a force of making the world bland and cultureless, or steamrolling over local differences with a kind of monoculture. And what you're saying is that the essence of the religion of Christianity is able to be transmitted without requiring all of the interesting artistic and language and other, ethnic differences. It doesn't need to erase those. Christianity itself can be kind of passed around the world, encapsulated.
Exactly, and what I'm trying to show is historic evidence for these kind of non-universalistic ideas. The fact that it's sort of it's like localistic. This isn't a Roman religion like culturally steamrolling somewhere else. It is like localizing and contextualizing at the same time. So again, like these examples that are held against Christianity as this kind of, we're the nation of open borders, we're the religion of open borders, we're the religion of non-statehood.
Mm-hmm.
Historically is not true. And you see this time and time again. Obviously this one moment, and again, this is the other thing, is like, maybe there is a point that Yarvan has around some like these ideas of open borders, etc., come from somewhere. Maybe there's a thread that comes from Christianity. However, that's not been the case for the last 2,000 years, or like the last 1,900. It's a super recent thing, and so I refuse to have the whole of Christianity tarred with the same brush of a very small period of time. Just going back to this point again a second, and contrasting a second, I just want to kind of show you some examples from Sasanian culture, which is I would describe it as like post Persian. It's kind of like 300 AD to 550 AD. You may think that the figure in the middle is famous YouTuber Academic Agent. However, it is not. It is actually one of the famous kings of Sasan. I mean, he does look quite...
This isn't fan work from the deep lore.
No, exactly. He does look a little bit like it, actually, although I think that will go to his head. He'll start wearing a balloon on his head and start saying that he's...
that way of doing the beard down the front, plaiting it, that's a look. Maybe I should, if this
you could do that, yeah.
Chin growth continues, I might be in with a shot.
You should try, yeah. The best thing is if you here's a Sasanian fact everyone's looking for. If you look at the trousers on the right hand side, you can see they almost kind of wear these kind of like chaps.
Yeah.
But also they have these kind of like feathers on the end, or like we don't know what they are. They're kind of like these hairs or feathers. So so everyone's wearing these like hairy hairy cowboy chaps in Persia, basically, all of the kings.
There is a kind of cowboys and Indians feeling about that whole coin.
Yeah, it's actually sorry to nerd out.
It's not a coin, plate.
It's a plate. It's a plate.
Sorry,
but
I should have known because it's almost the same size as that guy's head.
But Sasanian culture was one of the strongest in the world at that point. It was alongside the Byzantines were described as the two eyes of the world, which I think is a very beautiful way. And they were constantly fighting between the two of them. Now, for those who don't know how the Sasanians end up, they basically get steamrolled by Islam as part of the Islamic conquests, and totally wiped out. And
is that why we don't hear about them so much? Because all of their cultural artifacts have been destroyed, or almost all of them.
Basically, all of the fire temples, which is kind of like where they had their religion, were destroyed and knocked down. You may have heard of them through Freddie Mercury.
In what way?
He is from Zanzibar, which is a place in India, where all the Zoroastrian Persians move to, or some of them do. Some of them do. So he is an inheritor of the Sasanian Empire. So there's a little.
No way.
another nugget. But just culturally, it's totally unique to their region. It's a very powerful, it's a very beautiful. These are just a small selection of artifacts, right?
Yeah.
This is basically the kind of stuff they produce like post-Islam for the next 200 years. Because of the extremely strict hadiths on figurative representation.
Yes, you can't reproduce. Yeah.
But basically, there is no Iranian culture for another 200 years, basically after the Islamic invasions. What's also interesting is if you go to Egypt, if you go to the rest of North Africa, culture is flattened under Islam to such a degree. I was talking about the Coptics before. Coptics were the kind of the people before the Islamic invasions. They had a very distinct and vibrant culture through their textiles, through their famous frescoes. The Red Monastery, for example, is a great example of like late Coptic. I mean, they're still around, but like late Byzantine Coptic figures. But there is a cultural flattening that goes on because Islam is not just a religion. It is a legal system. It is a culture.
Yes.
It is a way of life. It is all encompassing, and that's what true universalism is, where no nation is allowed to have. Well, in the orthodox forms of Islam, Sorry, you go for a second, and I'll come back.
I was going to say we've seen the same thing in Iran again recently, haven't we? Where there was a tightening of the Islamic law, and along with it, also the culture. So it was looking surprisingly Western 20 years ago. I might be wrong about this, but correct me in the comments or Ferro if you know differently.
I mean, you could say that in Iran, for example, and again,
yes.
They sort of kind of pushed the orthodox Muslim button on it,
and suddenly it looks like every other part of the Islamic world, even two countries which are, hostile enemies of one another, like, Saudi Arabia and Iran look they, on the street level, they look similar to each other, the way people dress, etc.
I think that's fair to say. Now, I would say that there has been more kind of cultural like nationalism that's happened, but interestingly, that was brought by the Mongols, and that's a whole other. The Mongols brought culture back to Persia, basically. No, again, it's another interesting fact. But that's why I started going about kind of orthodox Islam. So there we go. Because again, AA was constantly holding up Islam as like the true perennial religion, while Christianity was the universal religion. But if you look and see what's the kind of consequence of Islam culturally across North Africa and the Levant and Saudi Arabia, it is a homogenization and a normalizing like you've never seen before. Everyone ends up producing this kind of low-tier geometric work that could be from anywhere. Genuinely, you can't tell like which nation people are from. Under the Ummah, which is this idea of are you familiar with the Ummah, which is like
no.
It's an Islamic idea of like Islamic personhood. You're all connected together. It is again like paganism is the true universal religion, but Islam is number two, basically.
Okay. Wow.
Okay. Are we ready to get deep? Because I've got some really esoteric arguments right now, which may blow people's minds. Okay.
Great.
Okay.
I'm very excited.
Here's a question. Are aesthetics, that is, are decisions about what is beautiful, are they purely culturally derived, or is there a genetic component to them? Right.
Wow, that's a deep question.
Here's a couple of points that I'm going to make you think about that. What is a sommelier? What does he do? Right.
He's an expert on tasting wines.
Yeah, that's right. But they often call him the nose, don't they? He has a nose which has the ability to identify certain flavors or smells, etc., that normal people can't do. But what is the nose? It is a sensory object. It's part of the body, which is ultimately derived by our genetics. So here's an interesting question. Is there any aesthetic element to genetics and peoples? Now, here's another question. I've always wondered about this.
Ooh, this is interesting.
Why do certain countries like spicy food and certain countries not like spicy food, or don't like highlight those kind of herbs and spices as the highest ones? So let's compare. Let's compare Mexican to English, for example. Right, Mexican, you got the chipotle, you got the paprika, the cayenne peppers. They love the spice. If you speak to any, like, I have a Honduran friend, and he always goes on about how the Mexicans love hot food. So this is a Latin American guy, or Central American, I should say, basically saying that. I mean, they have spicy food, and they're saying the Mexicans just love spicy foods. Now, why don't the English like spicy foods in the same kind of way as the Mexicans do? We have exactly the same access to herbs and spices, and actually historically we had access to two quite spicy herbs, horseradish and mustard. Why don't we just have like lots of spice in our meal?
Why aren't we lacing all of our dishes through with horseradish?
Exactly. Why haven't we done like made jerk chicken but with like horseradish and mustard?
I've got lots of potential theories popping up in my head, but I don't know how I would even start to get to the bottom of this. I assume you're driving towards a genetic explanation.
I'd like to say that I think it's part of it, or it must be a factor. I think obviously the kind of nature you're in obviously affects you. You know, if you're in a hot climate, hot climates seem to like want spicy food, for example. You see in India as well. So maybe there's an equatorial alignment as well. But
a couple of examples that we know is genetically influenced. That a lot of people around the world have intolerance to lactose, so milk-based dishes cause them it's like strong discomfort, and likewise they might have inability to process alcohol, so that's two flavors taken off the table right away.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So again, kind of like some of your genetic issues restrict your potential culinary palate. Yeah. But what I do want to argue is that that genetics do matter in terms of how the culture of a country ends up as well. Now, I want to park this idea. We're going to come back to it in a second, and then there's another mind-blowing idea, and then we'll pull it all together in an amazing way that will make 100% sense, but it probably won't. Okay. Are you familiar with the aesthetic deliberations of Edmund Burke?
I'm almost certain that I've heard these ideas at some point, but why don't you lay them out for me?
Yeah. So I keep asking you questions. Like, I'm sorry, Luke. I'm not trying to actually quiz you on this. This is more like have you heard of Burke? Basically, is what
I have heard of Burke. Yes.
Yeah. There we go. Edmund Burke, famous historian and philosopher. His books on the French Revolution are very, very famous. Yeah. But he's really well known in aesthetic philosophy through his deliberations over the sublime and the beautiful. Now, Burke was considering he was looking at nature, looking at reality, and saying, okay, certain things are beautiful. Like all humans can say, we all agree that certain things are beautiful, and there's this idea of beauty. But what are the intrinsic characteristics of beauty? How can I? Because he's an Anglo, he has to try and categorize it. If I was to say, can you write down what is something that's beautiful? And he said, okay, well, I'm thinking of beautiful. I think of a beautiful woman, and they're women. This is, I mean, Burke actually wrote this. They're small, they're smooth, they're soft. Look, genuinely, this is in the essay. I mean, he says it in the most eloquent way, which makes it sound so much better. But that's what he's basically saying. This is his categorization.
Soft. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think all of those are fair general comments, right? Women are small, they're smooth, and they're soft. Yeah, I'd accept that.
Can you, the next time you go courting with a woman, can you please just so smooth? You're just so smooth. But then he had a problem because he was observing nature and he said, okay, but what about mountains? Everyone knows that mountains are beautiful. We stand in awe of them. They're these tremendous, powerful objects, but they're not small. They're tall. They're not smooth. They're rough. They are like the opposite of women, yet they are still beautiful. How does that work, basically? And what Burke tries to do, he tries to square everything by basically saying that he recategorizes beauty, like a new form of beauty that he calls the sublime. So he says, women are beautiful, that's fine, they can still be beautiful. But there's also this new thing I've discovered called sublimity. So whenever you say something is sublime, you're actually using a Burkean word to discuss.
He invented the word.
I think so, yeah. In terms of, he describes it as being powerful, as tall, and like have these kind of mountainous like features. Now, I would argue that actually both of these things are beautiful, even though they're different. And what I wanted to kind of emphasize here is that I think God's plan for humanity is diversity, but not the kind of not the diversity that we know and love on our TV or on adverts.
Yeah, you're good. If this stream just gets clipped down to that phrase,
we love diversity, but the idea that multiple things, that even though they're intrinsically different, can be beautiful.
So is Burke not then saying that beauty is under the umbrella category of sublime, and that mountains are also sublime but not beautiful?
He separates them, which I think is a mistake, basically. But I'm basically saying that Burke's wrong.
Okay.
Because you can go to other parts of nature. It's not just mountains. What about like waterfalls, for example? Like, beauty definitely has archetypes. So, for example, like the archetypical beautiful woman looks the same all throughout history. Just look up the like interpretations of the goddess Venus, for example, or like love goddesses throughout time.
People always bring up like is it pre-Raphaelite women? Who was it? Who like the
Rossetti's women? Yeah, big jaw.
Yeah, but like I feel like there's a big push that has happened to try to make us believe that beauty is entirely culturally determined. That like, or look at, this decade women were meant to be slim, and the next decade they were meant to be buxom, and the next decade they were meant to be whatever.
It's a form of subjectivism again. But in the same way that I think Christianity has these, like, I think there is a contextual element. This is going back right to the start again, that C.S. Lewis universal moralism. I think what Christianity tries to offer or states is that there are we believe in a relative beauty, but also there is kind of like a contextual element. There is a kind of a spirit of beauty, so to speak, as well. But going back to this point about diversity, I think what's interesting is that if beauty can have many forms, and but only God can be truly beautiful. That is to say that only God can have the form of both a mountain and a beautiful woman at the same time. because he exists out of the plane of reality. He is all of the archetypes rolled into one. So what can we do in this reality? All we can do is to try and grab at like one part, like one of these archetypes as I described them, whatever. So I think what Christianity wants is lots of different nations all reflecting different forms of beauty at a local level. It's anti-homogenization. It's anti
that in fact God cannot be captured in a single form. His kind of magnificent divine properties are so multifaceted that it is only through the difference and variety of Christian celebration that he can be, embraced in all of his attributes, all the kind of, it shows the greatness of God that no single form of worship is complete or superior.
That's a really good way of saying it. No single form of worship is like enough. But I want to loop that back to the aesthetic genetics. What if every single nation on Earth, their purpose is to reflect those different forms of worship each, and that's built into who they are, and so there's an idea of each nation has value in its existing because it's able to reflect a facet of God, basically, like through the beauty that it aspires to or it can create at the same time.
So the Mexicans can be like, God is the spiciest of all the burritos.
That's not exactly not exactly what I was going for, Luke. But yeah, you can sort of see this maybe in higher forms, not burrito, not in street food art.
Well, you wouldn't understand because you're not Mexican, Ferro, but my
true.
Mexican viewers would understand.
They would be saying that. They're like, okay, that's true. But if you see, for example, Germanic art again versus Med art, there are different undercurrents or spirits or forces or whatever. This is what Spengler sort of talks about to a degree, but he kind of groups people together. I think it's even more diverse than that. Okay. Anyway, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep on going.
Let's keep trucking.
I want to talk about. So I'm going to round up and try and answer why I think Christianity has these. Why it ends up always incorporating part of the people and their existing cultures, right? And I want to start off about with Ruskin's thoughts on the importance of nature for culture. Now, this comes from his Stones of Venice, his classics, Stones of Venice, Volume 2, Chapter 5, The Nature of Gothic, where he tries to understand, like, where does Gothic architecture come from, right? And he basically states that Gothic architecture is not just a simple like list of architectural features. For true Gothicness is not a Gothic arch or a flying buttress or a pinnacle. It is actually like who you are. It's like a being or a type of person, and that type of person depends on where you live and where you're from at the same time. This idea of the nature that you're surrounded by changes your culture at the same time. So what he was constantly doing was basically comparing the Gothic. Basically, Gothicness is only a northern thing. I don't know if you knew this, Luke. Gothic architecture only happens in the north of Western Europe on the whole.
I didn't know that, but interestingly, it has always struck me on a kind of intuitive sense that Gothic architecture feels cold in some way. Like, I think I would have said that.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think
without any, just purely as an instinctive thing.
Yeah. So I just got a phone charger. 1 second. Can you? Would you
Shall I
mind
read
reading?
this?
Yeah, is that
Great.
okay? Thank you.
Let us contrast their delicacy and brilliancy of colour and swiftness of motion with the frost-cramped strength and shaggy coverings and dusky plumage of the northern tribes. Contrast the Arabian horse with the Shetland, the tiger and leopard with the wolf and bear, the antelope with the elk, the bird of paradise with the osprey, and then submissively acknowledging the great laws by which the earth and all that it bears are ruled throughout their being. Let us not condemn, but rejoice at the expression by man of his own rest in the statutes of the lands that gave him birth.
Thanks, Luke. And just to kind of give a pertinent example of that, would we ever have Turner if it wasn't for the British Sea? Would we ever have Constable if it wasn't for our rolling green pastures? You know,
somebody literally made this point in my Discord yesterday. Somebody had posted a photo of their view. I think it was in Surrey, out of their window. And someone from Canada said, it's like, looking at this photo, I understand why the English write such good fantasy.
Interesting. Yeah.
The exact same idea.
Exactly. 100%. And I think what Ruskin was trying to do was to say that, like, again, this is partly this genetic idea, but also, like, it's not just your genes as well. I think it's where you live. And I think you can see that in in international Angloism, right? The it's obviously complicated because America's, again, a bit of a mess or whatever. But if you think about the colonies of British people, Canada, USA, and especially Australia, I think Australia is the best example in terms of, like, they each have very different environments. They have similar genetics going in, but end up culturally reflecting very different aspects at the same time, and I feel like we continue to diverge as time goes on, if that makes sense. And I wonder whether we'll just continue to go further and further apart because of the nature piece. Why is this relevant? Or do you want to say something quickly?
No, I was just going to say that it feels undeniable that at the simplest, the closer you are to the equator, the more likely you are, you'll be wearing fewer clothes, and you'll have more likely to have a sort of vibrant, outgoing type of culture. And then as you go to colder extremes, the people are wearing giant fur coats, and they're sort of become almost externally unfriendly and hostile. And is that a fair kind of generalization?
100%. Yeah, and actually, the big example that Ruskin used was around the roofs of buildings. So you have to have, or certainly, like, for the last, we can actually get around it now because of technology, which is another interesting question. But basically, for the last 2,000 years, or even longer than that, you have to have a pitched roof in an English house. So your roof has to have, like, we call it a gable.
Hence all the confusion when you're reading the Bible stories about someone being lowered in through a roof, because as an Englishman, you don't walk on a roof.
Exactly. They typically have one-story buildings, and also they tend to have flat roofs as well, because you don't need to worry about the rain getting through, while our rain and our snow forces you down a specific cultural avenue, which is interesting. Ruskin then went on to say, basically, again, that the idea of the gable then points you upwards, gives you that kind of, as Spengler would say, Faustian exploration vibes kind of thing, and hence you get your cathedral and perpendicular Gothic, etc. But looping all of this, like, why is this relevant for the discussion again? I want us to ask a question about what makes a nation itself, and I think it has to be a combination of three things. I think it is at least three things. Certainly the people. So again, and that's again the kind of, which is a bunch of genetic signifiers. the culture those people have. And I think that's important. The example I always use for this is Tarzan, for example. If Tarzan is the archetype of the cultureless people, if we abandon what our parents believe, like in totality, then we sort of become something totally different. In Tarzan's case, he literally just swung between the trees and conversed with monkeys because he didn't have that kind of cultural impact. His genetic, and again, I think this is where a lot of extreme fellows get wrong. Extreme fellows on the internet get wrong where they think genetics is enough or it's powerful enough. You got to have the culture side too. You got to have that like tradition. Otherwise,
do you think these three could map to tribe, tongue, and nation? Like the tribe is the genetics, the tongue meaning language, but perhaps other cultural signifiers too.
Well, because oral traditions as well at that time, for example. So
and then nation being a state that controls a certain bit of the Earth's surface.
Yeah, exactly. And like we saw with nature again, that's gonna influence you, for example. Now, what's interesting about all of these three things is I keep expecting you to scroll. Christianity has none of these features at all. Christianity does not prescribe a specific peoples, or obviously Judaism does. It does not have a specific culture. That is to say that there are moral laws that are handed to us, but it doesn't tell us how to build the Bible doesn't tell us how to build a house. It doesn't tell us what we should wear, or it doesn't tell us what is beautiful. It doesn't tell us what tastes good, or what food is nice, or what food is best to eat in our area. And we don't have a land to go to currently. Now, I'm going to say this is going to be controversial because I know that I think some Catholics believe the kingdom of heaven is present and the Pope is like the king of that. I've heard from some interpretations. Hobbes has a huge discord on it at the end of Leviathan, which made me laugh a little bit. But there's significance in, I think, like, why does Revelation end where we're creating a new heaven and a new earth? Because finally Christians get our land, and only at that point are we like a proper people together. Do you know what I'm saying? Until that point, because Christianity doesn't have any of these issues, we will always tap into the culture of the whoever we're converting. We will always end up reflecting the genetics of the people that we speak to, and we will always. Sorry.
It is interesting that it's described as every tribe, tongue, and nation bowing before the throne, as opposed to you should go and make sure that all humans alive join our nation.
Yes.
Become one tribe.
Yeah, exactly. And I have got stuff like that in the second half, which is the theological. This is all just like, this is purely observed.
Sorry, I forgot we were following AA's rule of not quoting the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I would say there was one example I could think of, only one, where there was like specific cultural prescriptions, and interestingly, that was the tabernacle and also the priest's garbs. But those are the only times in the Bible.
But they were also given a promised land, like a specific bit of the earth. Yeah.
Exactly.
But they were like, Abraham was told he was blessed to be a blessing. So it was not meant. I mean, they didn't even end up worshiping God themselves. But in theory, the idea wasn't that they would make the whole earth part of Israel. It was they would be Israel, and all the other nations would also worship God.
Exactly.
I believe.
Yeah. And I guess just going back to kind of my point around this, even if, say for example, you're a Justin Welby that believes, like I presumably in no borders or whatever, or in a kind of in a universalist international form of Christianity, even if you believe in that, the reality is, say for example, we homogenized the entire world. We just created like one world. Tony Blair is our king of the one world government, and all genetics are like mixed
up.
Yeah. In the process of time, because these three things, and imagine everyone becomes Christian as well, right? So the religion isn't a problem as well.
Sure.
In the process of time, we will break apart because of these things. Because what will happen is that people who are living in New Australia are having a different, will reflect different things to people still living in the north who have different weather patterns, etc., etc.
Do you talk about Babel? Is that one of the things you mentioned in the theology section?
Not at all, because that was already a point talked about. So I was going, but it's worth chatting about it if you want to.
I was just going to say, there's a story in the Bible, literally, of an attempt to create a single homogenous world government that erects a kind of statue to the equivalent of Blair in our dystopian alt universe we were just describing. And it is God who comes down and causes that project to end and break apart and undoes the universalist / globalist project.
Yeah, so he does it very explicitly as well.
So yeah, in the kind of, as we're moving, I guess, to the theology section, I think it's clear that Christians would neither expect nor advocate for this kind of single world nation, or shouldn't. Perhaps some of them do, but
yeah, and again, I think that's I think that's the difficulty, because when we're having these accusations flung at us, all they have to do is to point to someone like Welby to say that this guy doesn't believe in any of the stuff that I've talked about. What I'm trying to say is there is a reality out there. It doesn't matter what Welby thinks or what individual Bible verses he quotes as part of it. Like, gravity exists, and this is gravity right now. And so that's ultimately my point, because again, and interestingly, we are unlike modern Judaism and we're unlike modern Islam, because again, both of those religions have all of these 3 points still. So
there's a kind of more accurate view of what's going on in the world. There are lots of different clusters of Christianity around the globe that are culturally distinct, and there's a small number of people attempting to bring them all together, and then the pagans are pointing at that small subset who are unsuccessfully trying to make a bland monoculture out of Christianity, and claiming that little group of people represents the religion as a whole.
Exactly. So and again, what I'm trying to show is that even if, for example, imagine Welby has his dream or whatever, and for example imports a bazillion African Christians to Britain. All you have is the English people die, and then it's just a new country and a new place, but it still has it has all of these 3 things, but from just a different peoples, if that makes sense. So
Ruskin's observations will hold true, and the culture will adapt to the geographic features, if nothing else.
Yeah. So I think you would end up with something new. It wouldn't be with enough.
It wouldn't
time,
recreate
it
British culture. It's not like everybody who's lived on these islands has exactly the same set of predilections as the British.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
But it being an island nation, it's fair to say it's always had a distinction from the continent.
Yes, exactly. I think any peoples that lived here would always be a little bit aloof. I think it's interesting thinking. I think Ireland's mentality is it's exceptionalism. It's again, we're always weird with our with our forms of Christianity, for example.
Yeah.
As well. You've got Celtic Christianity, which is unique to basically our islands only. That becomes this is before the schism. So then we've got kind of more orthodox. So basically, in about 500, they get rid of the Celtic stuff. It's all kind of normalized. But even then, we've got a very unique form. So, for example, our kings choose the archbishop still. This is like one of the point of contentions, that this is why the Pope basically sent William the Conqueror to come, basically, because we had our own forms of we weren't like continental Christianity, if that makes sense.
Much like even when we were part of the EU, we always had this like special deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Even when we were part of Catholicism, we still had a special deal.
I think it is definitely like related to being an island, basically.
And then when we had our Reformation, it didn't, like, Anglicanism is notably different from Lutheranism or Calvinism.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the Anglicanism is like the weirdest fudge mishmash of.
You're right.
that only it's like a beautiful failure, like, and it still weirdly clings on in its totally unique form. So
yes, in quiet desperation is the English way.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, those are the more interesting arguments. I've got some theological stuff. I don't know, like, it's only a few more slides.
This is the point at which AA checks out on the off chance that he's wanted to watch the stream.
Exactly, yeah. But I've got a couple of things. I mean, we sort of touched this on this already, and I think Luke, you sort of mentioned this already. But how does the Bible talk about God interpreting man? Well, he sees him as both an individual, but also part of a tribe or a nation. It's often. And I've got kind of 3 examples of this verse-wise. I've got the verse specifically talking about the judgment of the nations. I want to talk about the punishment of Egypt, and then again, like the non-intermixing with the Canaanites.
Mm-hmm.
This is I should have got this. I've forgotten to put the verse that's part of this. But do you want to?
I'll sneakily Google it in the background to get the reference.
Okay,
Do you want to read it while I do that?
Yeah, I'll read it. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then he shall sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another. Shepherd divided his sheep from the goats, and he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. So again, he's seeing them as he's gathered all the nations. Now, if there was a true universalist God, wouldn't he see like all these individuals or all the people from one homogenous group? Why is he specifically talking about nations at this point? God has gathered the nations. So, and this is there are many like references to nations. There's a verse in Psalms and stuff like that as well. I managed to find, which I didn't include.
It's Matthew 25, by the way.
Oh yeah, there we go.
But partly the fact that it talks about nations constantly shouldn't be surprising, because almost everyone throughout all of history thought in terms of
nations and tribes.
Nations, and it's only a weird modern thing where people sort of imagine a world with no borders. John Lennon, chief culprit.
Exactly. Okay, second verse is Exodus 11. Now God has said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here, and when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably dispossessed towards the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and by the people. So Moses said, this is what the Lord says, about midnight will go through Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn of the Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and the firstborn of the cattle as well. I'll stop there. But an interesting thought about this was, why is the entire nation being judged here, Luke? Like what? Because again, like Pharaoh, fair enough. He's hard of heart. We've heard he's belligerent and not a nice guy here. But what about this slave girl here? What is it? The firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill. That's just, she is the lowliest of society. What's she done wrong to deserve that? But I would argue that God has effectively judged the whole nation by its ruler at the same time. And this is an example that God is seeing man at. He judges man both individually, but also in forms of nation. We see this also explicitly in terms of Israel, where Israel is found wanting, and they're invaded and carved up or carted off to Babylon.
Yeah,
etc.
if you read Judges, it's very explicitly laid out that more or less every chapter of Judges starts with, and the people disobeyed God, and then this terrible thing happened to them. They were invaded by whoever, and then the people repented, and then God gave them a judge, and then the judges become less and less effective. God's kind of forgiving them for their disobedience and letting them have another chance and another chance, but the chances sort of wear out, as it were.
Yeah. So, also, I always think that's a really good example of cyclical biblical history as well. But again, God judges people in terms of nations. He's thinking in terms of nations as well.
Yep.
And then we've got the kind of classic in terms of like, how does God treat his special people? Well, he recognizes that they are a unique tribe or group of people that specifically shouldn't crossbreed with other pagan groups in the local area. I'm obviously not advocating I'm not saying about non-interbreeding with any other group. I don't personally believe in that. But what I'm trying to say is that, again, how does God view man and groups together? And at this specific point, specifically for the Israelites, he had this request for them, and he considered things in that specific area.
You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. And I mean, they do it, and then they do get pretty much destroyed. Spoilers.
Yeah. Classic Israel. Okay, so hopefully we've shown in those three verses that, again, God sees nation. He does not see this kind of internationalistic form of peoples that we're often accused of being part of, whatever.
Yeah,
okay.
There's more examples than those as well. So
I think there's an absolute ton. I was just trying to do
uncontroversial. Yeah, everyone would agree. I think that God deals in terms of nations. Great.
The second, so like I said, I didn't include the Babel point because that's already been covered quite well. Like AA even admitted it himself that he thinks that's the most powerful verse towards it, but I don't. I think there's more depth if you put the time and effort in, which I know that he is not interested in doing around. But biblical, I can say all of this now because he's probably not listening at all. He's definitely not listening at this point. So, okay, the second group again. I wish I had more time. We only planned this like a month in advance, and I've been thinking about these ideas for a while. So I wish I'd had more time to develop this section. But I think Christianity advocates for ideas of a moral weight around family and proximity. That is to say that the way that we should treat people who are closest to us familiarly and physically is different to the way that we should treat people further away from us physically and who we're not related to in the same kind of way. Or there's this, like I said, I see it as a gradation which kind of starts off strong with your mother and father, siblings and children, and then descends throughout a nation who we're typically related to some degree, and then becomes a spatial thing, right?
If anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
That's great. I should have had that. I should have had that verse.
Yeah.
I've got. I do have. Oh, I had the widow's one beforehand. Have you seen this? Yeah, give proper recognition to the widows who are in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, they should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family and repaying their parents and grandparents. So again, there is this important need to provide for your own and to look after your own in preference.
And there's clear evidence that the Christians were not to. So, for example, if you converted to Christianity but were already married to somebody who wasn't a Christian, you were to remain married to them. You would pray that they would themselves convert, but these ideas of family, care for your spouse would apply even if your spouse wasn't Christian, which actually puts an interesting wrinkle on the slide you did way back about
exactly
priority order.
And I think all of this stuff kills that in my mind. I think an orthodox view of Christianity, because of the importance of family and placing family first, or through this kind of moral gradation, your nation will always take preference over the foreigner, even if they are Christian. Now, between the Christian foreigner and the Christian non-foreigner, there's other verses where I think the Christian, we should basically put more charity, and I think you should still look after those people, but the emphasis should be on the family first. So
now, just a thought that's crossed my mind that might be relevant. The story of the Good Samaritan, which is usually told as this is a story that explains that Jews should care for which is used to mean like Christians should care for everybody, right? Like it's often used to mean like, okay, well, just because you're English and this poor refugee isn't English, then you should care for him because he's like the Samaritan, so let him in. This is often the kind of way it's explained, but you can look at it as being the Jews didn't consider the Samaritans to be correct religiously, but the Good Samaritan noticed that the person who was near him, right, his neighbor geographically, was in need, and it was his responsibility to care for him, as a neighbor, as somebody who was like not religiously affiliated, but was like next to you. So actually, you could completely flip it on its head and say that, okay, you're a Christian and you're an Englishman and your fellow Englishman is in trouble. Are you going to ignore him just because he's not a Christian? Well, apply the story of the Good Samaritan.
That's interesting.
You should actually care for the Englishman who is a pagan, so that you can actually read the story as completely the opposite way around.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, you got to remember that parable is in the context of Jesus asking, or someone asking Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And I think that's really interesting as well. He's not trying to say, "Oh, like how should you act?" Could we just bring it up a second, because there is an element.
Yeah. Give me a second.
It's worth. The interesting thing isn't the parable itself; it's the beginning, the part just before and the part just after. I remember. But I've always thought that, it's about, again, understand, like, because I think it's related to Jesus was saying, you should treat your neighbor like you treat myself, and then someone was like, yeah, but who's my neighbor, basically?
Exactly, and the slightly confusing thing here is that the people asking the question would have tied together their nationality and their religion and would have considered Jesus to be Jewish, right? So here we are. Is this right?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so you blah, 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 and your neighbor as yourself. So that's again, I think that's an interesting universe. Sorry, if you scroll up a second to verse 27, this is an interesting. You could interpret it as a universalist verse, where you're saying, look, therefore, like anyone else in the world as a global neighbor has you have the same moral obligation to those people as you do for not only yourself but your family as well. But then he asked, but then he says, yeah, who is my neighbor? And then he goes into trying to understand who the neighbor is. And this in itself is interesting, because I think there is also an argument to say you're the neighbor that you should treat with the same like level of moral obligation as yourself is the person who would show you mercy at the same time, if that makes sense. But this is interesting, because then that should be done at an individual level. So, for example, like one thing about asylum is it's done like at a national level. This like the whole of this entire like all Afghanistans are welcome for asylum. But what this verse is saying is that it's that specific Samaritan, because of his exceptional nature. He didn't act like a normal, like he didn't act. He gets, he sort of achieves that status of moral obligation for being unique. But how can you work that out through an asylum claim or something? Is what I'm trying to say there. How do you know that? So for example, a person knocked on your border wall and said, "Let me in. I'm in need." How would you know that they are your neighbor in this context, which is someone who would show mercy to you? You'd only know that through an individual relationship with those people, and that's why I feel like you can't. What the practical implications of it means is you can't work it out through. You can't execute something like that through a legal policy. It's through individual, like just knowing individuals, for example. And I think what that ultimately means is this is about like where you should spend money and how you should like do some charitable giving, for example. Just don't give it to random people. It has to be to people that like are worthy in some ways. It's a complicated and interesting thing. But anyway,
yeah, it's as ever when you dig into Jesus' teaching, it proves to be much more subtle and interesting and challenging to every side than it first appears. But I guess my original point was that the first two people who come past are like a priest and a Levite, as in they're like the friendlies.
But also they're archetypes as well. There again, it's kind of like these are the most holy and most religious. So they, again, from a moral perspective, they should be outstanding, if that makes sense in their scenario. I think it's super important who they chose.
Yeah. So from the point of view of the lawyer asking the question, they would have expected,
people like us.
But before they got the point of Jesus's story, before they'd like learnt their lesson, they would have thought that it was going to be the priest who helped or the Levite who helped, and that they were the neighbor. And therefore, when they're told to love your neighbor as yourself, they were thinking like, well, I'll love my priest as myself, I'll love the Levite as myself. And then now the aspect of nationhood that's usually like pushed front and center is that the Samaritan is a foreigner, and therefore this gets taught as an anti-racist tale. But that is to ignore like several levels of what's going on, right?
It's also more complicated as well, because obviously the Samaritans they're the people living in former Israel properties. They're typically like half Israeli, aren't they, in the first place? So they're not even like they're not a separate nation.
No.
They're because also the word neighbor is complicated. It has certain Jewish like connotations in the Old Testament as well. If you go back and see the reference to that, because again there is stuff about people converting to Judaism, becoming a neighbor and stuff like that.
But the other appearance of Samaritans is the Samaritan woman who was who talks to Jesus, and
yes,
and she's asking, or should we come and worship at the temple because you're a Jew and you guys say that our form of worship isn't acceptable to God. So that's kind of an insight into the type of tension that there was, that there was this different religious practice that the Samaritans were performing that didn't match the Mosaic law. But of course, there's this whole history of Israel splitting into Judah and Israel, and then first the Israel bit falling, and then also the Judah bit falling, and then the temple being remade. So this parable of the Good Samaritan also, we ought to move on. I guess the point is there's lots going on, and it needs needs further interpretation before you can just apply it in a dumb way, right?
Again, I think that's it. This is where I sort of like the theological arguments I lean less towards, because
sure
you need to have a lot of it's like a long discussion, and I feel like someone like AA is never going to do it justice. He's always just going to like interpret it in his own ways rather than actually caring about the truth.
It's incredibly difficult to do theology correctly in good faith.
That's it, yeah.
And if there's the slightest hint of somebody attempting to do it subversively, then it's just a hopeless waste of time, I guess.
Yeah.
At least if the people in the discussion are for themselves genuinely trying to understand the Bible, then you can dig in and have the conversation. Do you want to carry on through your?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're basically at the.
That's the end.
Practically the end. I think I've got. What was I going to say? I quite like this one. Yeah, and he made from what this is again. You talk about. You mentioned it earlier. Paul's speech?
Yes, to Mars Hill.
To the Greeks. Yes, yeah. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So yeah, again, like God determining allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place, that like blew my mind. Like certain nations should live in this specific place for this time, and these are the boundaries of that. Again, that's all part of God's predetermination. And
which shouldn't surprise us in a way, because we see God saying, "Oh, look, Israel's going to own this bit of land. There's currently other people living there, but
exactly, it's their time."
Just determine, and this is just a wider application of that, which I think as Christians we have a tendency to see stuff going on in the Old Testament to Israel and say, well, that goes in a special box because it was Israel, and God obviously was acting, to determine their future and judging them for their sins. But it's not going to, and I think this is a real mistake, because, I mean, we look at the culture around us, like, say, England as a nation is embracing, like, lots of different types of sin in a familiar pattern, heading towards a point of, I would say, inevitable judgment.
Annihilation. Yeah, exactly.
And short of repentance to God, we should have some confidence from a Christian perspective of saying we've seen this pattern before, and it's laid out dozens of times.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, last thing I've got, and I'll be quiet. This is the kind of conundrum around this that kind of moral weight that I mentioned. Is it more like it's easy? Okay, in an example of, if you had £10 and that £10 is going to save two people's lives, one is like your mum, and one is someone you've never met before on the other side of the planet.
This is like a trolley problem.
No, yeah, but it's obvious that your mother. It's the moral thing to do.
It's the easiest trolley problem I've ever heard.
Is the mum. But what about? I think what's interesting is what about a case where it's not saving someone's life, it's prolonging it, or even like what about like homeless people, for example? You know, is it better to house a homeless man from your tribe or from your people than it is to save the life of someone else internationally? And I think that's what I think there is a big grey area, and I think there is nuance and context that is needed. But again, I think that is where, like that's where at the start I didn't want to say that I think that you know, Christianity is this totally non-universal entity. I think it's more complicated than that. Is what I'm trying to say. Like I think hopefully I've shown kind of from reality there are elements which mean that it actually, compared to other religions, it is decidedly non-universal. However, because of our desire to care for humans and again to love others like we love ourselves, we you know, I think that the international, like, you know, we care about international humanity in a way that other religions possibly don't, is what I would say, right? But I refuse to say that that's a bad necessarily a bad thing outright. In the same, do you know what I'm saying? I'm not.
Yeah.
Maybe Christianity has a little bit of universalism in that, but but I'm refusing to say that that's necessarily a bad thing at the same time. So even if you can stick something on us, I think it's situations like these, it's this moral grey area, you know, where you know, we're looking out for the best people. So
the extreme position that says that you should spend every single pound that you can on like malaria nets, you know, that you should be myopically focused on this universalist interpretation of ethics is promoted by like Peter Singer and philosophers like that, generally coming from an atheist perspective, and you know, this is the kind of effective altruism line. But apart from those extreme people, I think most people generally would agree that there is this concentric circles of concern where you're going to want to care for wider humanity to some degree, but you'll care more for people who are closer to you, and that your nation is perhaps one of those concentric circles, right? But there's this example in the New Testament of churches sending money to other churches who are in a famine. So there's certainly some degree of, let's as Christians look after other Christians around the world, and that money, you know, could have been used for other purposes. So I think grey area is right, that we've kind of shown both perspectives from the Bible, that there's occasions where you spend your resources to care for your family, and in fact those who don't do that are worse than unbelievers. And family could be family there, it was like including, it said, and especially household, and household would have included like
aunts and
your
uncles,
slaves
cousins.
or
Yes, yeah,
whoever
that's
was
also true. Yeah.
not even familial. Like,
Yeah, but I mean that's complicated because they're technically property as well. Though, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
again,
but
I know what you're saying. It's
like the widows among. I guess the point is that there's both this proximal and also religious like angles, and it's just it just seems apparent that you have to split some of your resources both ways, as it were. Like you know, it's right to have some concern for Christians internationally and have some concern for people who aren't Christians locally. Those two middle blocks almost should be stacked on top of each other, because it's down to each individual Christian to pray and consider and, you know, weigh
exactly.
up.
And I think the individualities, in my opinion, is super important again, because what is the moral value of the nation performing actions, right? If a nation carries out an asylum claim, do we gain the moral benefit of that? Do we get, like, again, obviously we're not in it for the angel on our right shoulder writing down the list of our goods here, but again, just from an ethical perspective, is that our moral good? And if that is the case, is it our moral bad when our country is killing millions of babies every year in abortion clinics, which is supported by the government? I think in my mind, we cannot claim moral value, so to speak, from any national level campaigns. So like even for example, like foreign aid or or asylum, it has to be at an individual level, and that's my position has always been the I think what Christianity should be about is where the nation shouldn't involve itself in any of this whatsoever, effectively, and that individual Christians should be discerning and making personal sacrifices to use their money in an individual level. That's like what actual like proper. That's what actually charity is. That's what actual that's what love is an individual act, not anonymous part of a collective group. And also the one, sorry, Luke, I want to say one last thing I want to say as well is like, and what is our response to the world as well? And again, like so for example, we can recognize that there are many places internationally which have problems. Is our solution to that to import those problems and bring it to our own country, or is there better ways of doing that? And again, I think Wellbe's solution to everything is to import the problems of the rest of the world into our country and expect none of those problems to continue. Where all I see is fundamental problems coming down the line from doing that, and actually maybe a more I keep emphasizing local centric approach would be better, rather than flying someone halfway around the world for an asylum claim. Why not help them help fund a place in the country next to them? There is another verse that I couldn't find in time about saying don't like it's like go to your nearby town or something like that if you're in trouble.
Oh, you mean the city of refuge thing?
Yes, yeah.
In the Old Testament.
No, it's a. I think it's a New Testament verse.
Is it okay? I'm thinking of a different thing then.
If I dig it out, I'll share it. I just couldn't find it in time, but so that's it.
Was this evangelism or?
No, this was like widow adjacent. I think again, people
widow adjacent.
Yeah,
I'll see what I can find in the background. I'm doing my young Jamie bit.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Well, I was just going to do a bit of a sum up now, but basically, I think there are these just to kind of wind all the way back to the start. I think there are these kind of two groups pushing this narrative that basically Christianity is essentially at fault for all of the world's problems. Firstly, through the kind of Mulbuggian view that we're living in this post-Christian age, and through the Bappian view of the inherent weakness and Christian universalism is causing problems with the world. What I think you can see in reality is that, in terms of religions, Christianity is one of the least universal built in, both in terms of what actually happens, through time, denominations forms, through cultural interpretations, but through the fact that Christianity doesn't prescribe specific cultures, peoples, or places. It will always have to be seen through an individual location. And so Christianity, in some ways, is the most peoples-focused religion that exists, even more so than paganism. So I totally refute everything that Bap has to say about Christianity. In terms of, is Christianity a purely universalist religion, or is it not? I would say I don't think it is a purely universalist for some of those reasons we looked at. God sees man in terms of the individual as the nation. He highlights the importance of the family and organizing ourselves and sorting our house out first before organizing the rest of the world. But we do have a moral obligation to the rest of the world, and I think someone like Bap's Nietzschean strength worship is not a successful strategy for the long term, because God makes nations rise, but he also makes them fall. Yes. And the strong cannot pass on their strength for many generations. And I think that's what you got to realize, is that maybe you as an individual are particularly strong in one area. Maybe you're the best person of your generation, but I can tell you within 3 generations, your children will not be the same as you. It's very hard to maintain that. And so, like, how do you reconcile that fact? You're banishing your own children to Tartarus itself. So, boo to those people. Yay to Christ. Luke, I don't know if there's any final words from your side.
Yeah, I guess that this sprang from a dialogue of sorts between Christians and non-Christians. I think that the real root of the disagreement is that the ultimate objectives of non-Christians are fundamentally Faustian. Like the kind of, like you were saying, Nietzschean strength is whether it's acknowledged or not, is a kind of let us eat, drink, and be merry for in this life, and that the Christian call is fundamentally to an eternal kingship that happens in the life beyond. So, there is this sort of, there's a level on which this whole conversation is, I always feel like is a smokescreen for the true disagreement. I know that's a slightly confusing thing to say, but
no, you're right. It's the whole thing's mute, basically, because I see, we're working to a different plane that they don't even focus on, basically. So.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like there's this back and forth where that there are these people who are trying to figure out if they can be bedfellows in a political project, and the end goal of the Christians is not political, and that is kind of interpreted as weakness, and in a certain sense I can see the point. I suppose I'm trying to take a conceptual step back from the argument that's happening at hand, and more think about the entire way the conversation is playing out, which may be beyond the scope of the stream.
What we need to do is to have answering Nietzsche stream, basically, because no, I think, again, I think he is a dark spectre that looms over modern Christianity, because I think no one's really had a good pop at him, right? Whenever I hear people, like whenever I hear Christians talk about Nietzsche, they was like, "Oh yeah, he's lame, he's just a loser," and it's like, yeah, okay, go on then, that's fine, I agree with you. What refute his points though? That's the thing, and I think we need to. What BAP has done? Okay, here's what's happened basically. The Second World War, like, destroyed Nietzscheism basically, and it sort of got locked under the key. But it's going to come back, and it's going to come back in a big way. And I think we need to have answers to questions that he asks, and no one's really analyzed his work yet. So I think in a similar way, like this universalism thing is like one dart that he sends, and there are many others. Again, I think that the worship of weakness is another great thing to look at. I think, like to your point around, I guess kind of like living for today versus considering the afterlife, or that whole, and the whole kind of politics thing. I mean, I don't think I necessarily agree with you around the politics side, but I can see, I understand where you're coming from on that point. But
yeah, I probably didn't articulate myself very well. But if you imagine yourself as like Mario, and you've just done an excellent job smashing this universalist attack, and you've made it to the end of the level, and I guess what I'm saying is, like, the princess is in another castle. So
that was actually a really good analogy. For a computer game, for your second computer game analogy of the day, that's been pretty good.
You accept this one at least.
Yeah, this is great. I understand this one, so that's the.
Well, I'd like to thank you enormously for the presentation you prepared and walked us through, and it was both very enjoyable, enlightening, and mind expanding, as you always are, and it's been a delight and a pleasure to have you on. Have you got any very final thoughts or anything that you want to plug?
No, I just want to say thank you very much for having the chance to discuss this. If you are listening to this right now and you've got an opinion, please leave a comment. And if you thought this was a good stream, why not smash the subscribe button right now? You know, what does it cost you? Why don't you ring the bell? Why don't you share? Why don't you? Okay.
I saw someone in the comments saying that they didn't get it in their subscription feed.
Well, it's because it's such a deep topic that, like, YouTube knew this was going to be a powerful stream.
Hydrosphere, ring the bell. That's the obvious answer.
Yeah, exactly. Look, next Sunday, you're at church, your family's there. Just write down the link for this stream to your nana and give it to her. let's check it out. Do it old school. Just send it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, we are lacking in our sort of septuagenarian plus demographics.
We need more boomers. We need more boomers. That's the.
They haven't got long to, like, they've got only a few more Lambda streams to watch before they, pop the clocks. So it's,
absolutely dark from Luke there right at the end.
This has been Lambda Bible Studies. Thank you so much for tuning in. Why not look in the video description for my Discord links, and go and subscribe to Ferro's channel as well. He is absolutely one of my favorite people online at the moment, and in real life. I'm not. We have actually met, so I can say that for a change. So yes, tune in next time for more eye-opening Bible discussions.